Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Depot in Norman. I'm Mike Duncan, and we're having a conversation today with photographer Ron Tarver, whose exhibit, The Long Ride Home, Black Cowboys in America, will be shown at the Depot Gallery in Norman from September 13 into late October. And it's an exhibit that is going to be really great for our patrons at the gallery and anybody else who wants to come and see it. This work, Ron will get into it here in a minute, but I can say that it is a particularly unique look into the contributions that Black men and women have made to the American cowboy culture. And I love this. The prints, I've gotten a sneak preview of some of them. They're big, they're colorful, a lot of action going on. And I'm curious to talk a little bit about how you put all that together. Let me tell people a little bit more about you before we get started. Ron is an acclaimed photographer, recipient of the Guggenheim and Pew Fellowships. He has won the Pulitzer Prize with his team at the Philadelphia Inquirer in their reporting on racialized school violence. His work you have seen in National Geographic, Nat Geo, Lifetime, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, you name it. You've probably seen Ron's photography there published. He was the first Black photographer of the Muskogee Daily Phoenix back in the 1970s, and that's where I became first acquainted with his work. He went on to newspaper work in Missouri, then off to the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he had a tremendous career, 32 years, I think it is, at the Inquirer. So today, Ron is a professor of fine art at Swarthmore College in Philadelphia. It's a long way from that Muskogee Daily Phoenix newsroom, Ron. It really is.
Yeah.
Your photography has been seen in solo exhibits around the country in places like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and most notably the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. You are the grandson of a working cowboy. That's kind of important, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And a native of Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. Go Tigers. So thanks for joining me, Ron. This is really awesome. I'm looking forward to your show. Tell us, before we kind of go into talking about the exhibit that we're having here in Norman, how did Ron Tarver go from being the young man growing up in the Muskogee area to Ron Tarver, the photographer and now teacher? How did you start?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I'll go back a little bit and talk about my dad some. So he was a photographer in the 40s and 50s, and he had negatives stacked up, that he would tack up on the side of his darkroom. One of my jobs was to take those negatives down, wash them, and then he would hang them back up, and then they'd collect dust. And then the next year he would take them down, I would wash them again. And, so this was an ongoing process, but I've kind of had my hands on negatives and in photography for a long time. But I remember when I was a little kid, he showed me his darkroom, and he said, if you take a look in the water and you'll see a ghost appear. And of course, I thought Casper was going to come wafting up out of the water, But when I saw that picture come up and develop, I was just hooked. There was just something so magical about that. And I just thought that this is what if I can figure out a way to make this my life's work. And my dad was a big newspaper reader. And I think, he encouraged me as best he could to, like when I said I really wanted to be a photographer and wanted to be a journalist, I think he thought that was a good idea. And so I got a job as I was a high school photographer. I went from there to an internship at the Muskogee Daily Phoenix, working with Wayne Seabolt. I don't know if you remember him, but he was a photographer for the Muskogee Daily Phoenix, and just the only really real photographer I knew, so I was just enamored by him, and sort of hung out under his heels for a while, and then went to college, became the college photographer at Northeastern State, one of the college photographers, along with Mark Moore and some of my other friends that uh, we were all school photographers. And then after I graduated, I got a job in at the Phoenix, a real job. And so then I was off and running after that, and went from there to the Times or the Springfield News Leader in Springfield, Missouri, and then from there to the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Your experience in newspaper photography and news photography, um, what did you take? I mean, we all know who have been there that sometimes that starts out with some not so glamorous images of the occasional Chamber of Commerce grip and grin
Oh, yeah,
pictures
yeah.
to even some auto accident stuff. And but if you look back over the years that you've been a photographer, what part did the news work have on shaping how you photograph?
Well, I think, I mean, now that I'm kind of in this role of teacher and somewhat mentor to young people, I tell them all that stuff you got to do, you got to cut your teeth on all that kind of work. Now newspaper jobs aren't as available as they used to be. Photojournalism jobs aren't available as they used to be. But I think you really have to have it in your soul. You really have to have, if you want to be a photographer with the big P, not necessarily journalist or art or whatever, but if you have to follow your passion. And if that's what your passion is, you have to realize you're not gonna make any money probably off the bat. Um, and you have to just jump in head first and see what it's going to be, what's going to happen. And then, talk to people who are around you that can give you advice. Um, but yeah, I don't know if my path even exists anymore. How I got to be to
Yeah.
this place, uh, but I do know that it does take a certain drive and passion and grit um, to have. I mean, I was by no means the smartest tool in the shed when it came to my schoolwork, but I did love photography.
Is there a style of photography that is Ron Tarver's style?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I do love long form documentary work, and one of my idols was W. Gene Smith. So I think my work, I did my best to mimic his style, if there's any way around that, to think about that. I really, thinking about light, thinking about in the case of this book, color, just finding really nice light to make your images in, and finding nice light in the really bad light. So, I don't know if I have a style or not. But I do like telling stories with images. Now, the book and the exhibition is not that. It's not the images are pulled from a lot of documentaries, a lot of stories that we pull the images from.
Mhm.
But I didn't want the book to have that narrative structure. I wanted it to be just really beautiful images of this lifestyle and not in any narrative way.
But what was it about this particular topic? And we'll talk about that now. The Black Cowboy in America. What was it about that subject matter that drew you to it?
Mhm. Well, I mean, so how I started this whole project, I was working at the Inquirer. I had come off of a long, long project where I worked with an excellent reporter, David Zucchino. We were doing drugs in North Philadelphia. It was, one of the, I mean, there's been so many heroin opiate epidemics, but this was a big one in Philadelphia in the early 80s, early 90s. And so the paper sort of detached us for almost a little bit longer than a year and a half, off and on, to cover that story. And we did a huge story. It was a 5-part series in the paper. Then a magazine. We had a Cine magazine piece. We did a big magazine section on it. And that just really took a lot out of me. I mean, all the images were black and white. And I was really just mentally and physically exhausted from that story. It was very difficult seeing people in those conditions. Um, so I thought that, well, the next story I want to do, I want it to be something that's going to have a little bit more joy to it. That first of all, be in color, um, and something that I thought I could just maybe jump into, maybe spend a month or so on it, put it in the magazine, and that would be it. Just sort of wash my head a little bit, wash my brain a little bit with
But it
what I'd
sounds like
been.
after that you came back to it on different occasions.
You mean
Is
on
that
the
right?
Cowboys?
The Cowboys, you've got a large body of work here
Oh
now.
yeah, I mean, when I did that, when I did the first story and it ran in the Sunday magazine, we got so much mail from our readers saying that we didn't know this existed and this and that, and I thought that's what really uh, baffled me because I grew up in that. I grew up with the sort of the cowboy culture for one thing, and then with relatives that had ranches and farms and things like that. And my grandfather being a working black cowboy. So it wasn't new to me, but it was fascinating to me that people didn't know that culture existed.
So did you take it then on the role of really educating everybody about this aspect of not just the American cowboy culture, but the black community as well,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
something they didn't know about?
Oh yeah. Well, after we had such a phenomenal response to that magazine story, I talked to my editors and said, well, hey, how about if you cut me loose and let me go across the country and find some stories, and we'll do some stories for Black History Month, the upcoming, I think it's at 1994 Black History Month. And this is at a time when papers were flush with money, and so they let me go, and I went out, found all these stories across the country, came back. We did a 5-part series in the regular paper, in the daily paper, about Black cowboys, and then Geographic saw it. Tom Kennedy, who was director of photography, saw it and asked me if I would do something for them, and they gave me a grant to photograph for roughly about 6 months. And so I took a leave of absence from the paper, started working on it for them, and that's the way that it just kind of blossomed. And I think I wound up with like about 15,000 usable transparencies. This was back in the transparency days, not digital. So slides, and they were all, you know, in a box. I have them back there and behind me now. They're all cataloged in notebooks. But that was kind of my COVID exercise, just to catalog everything.
There is a common uh, idea in photography that the work of a photographer is every image they take or every portrait they take is really a self-portrait of the photographer. How
Hmm.
much of what we see in your work is a glimpse of who Ron Tarver is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I haven't, I never haven't really thought of that. I mean, because my perception of myself as a photographer is to be the fly on the wall. I don't want to be in the photographs in any way. I mean, that's just the way now, I mean, that's a big debate too. Should you be part of should you have some of you in the photo? And I don't think there's any of me in the photographs, but maybe I'm not the right one to ask that or to answer that. So I don't know.
So after over these years, you have this now a collection that fits this category, that fits this topic. And how did it go from, okay, now I've got all these slides,
Hmm.
what do I do with them? How did that go and become what we're going to see in Norman at this exhibit?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I had just going back a little bit, I'd tried to do this book and I had put together, I'd gotten some grants along the years and put together small exhibits and things like that. But I really wanted to do a book, and I couldn't get anybody interested in doing a book. It just took forever. And so when I finally found some people that are interested, and the book was published, um, I contacted a friend of mine who worked at Geographic. Well, actually, this all happened before the book was published, but I contacted a friend of mine at Geographic, and we literally sat down, and this was during COVID. So we did a lot of this on the computer. So we put everything in Lightroom, which is a sort of photography database, and just started editing stuff on the computer and putting things in folders and looking at, how does this work with this, and we edited it, went from 20,000. And of course, 5,000 of those are just maybe the sky and your feet, and the grass and things like that. So throw all those out. And then you get down to about 15,000. And then from there, you just start editing and editing and editing. And, so how do these work? Breaking them down into stories and then pulling images out of those stories. We got it down to around 500 from there. And then you start with what you call killing your darlings. You really start just.
I was getting ready to say this has to be a almost painful process where you're rejecting some of your own work in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. That's hard.
And it's really hard when you've been looking at it for 30 years, when you've been looking at these images for so long. And after a while, it just becomes sort of just mind chatter. It doesn't even look like an image anymore. I mean, I know I can say out of that group, there's maybe 5 that I think are the really nice photos. The rest, I really didn't know what they were until I started talking to people about them and talking with, photographers that I really trust that have a really good sense about what great photography is and how to put those together. And then finding a book editor who understood what I wanted from the book, who could sequence the images, which is a whole other skill that I don't claim to possess. But it took literally a village to make this book. People were probably sick of me calling them up all the time saying, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?
I want to share with everybody one of the images that is actually the cover of your book, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This image here. And tell this Warren Felt. I love this picture. It has a softness to it, a texture to it. It's a simplicity to it that just really speaks to you. And just as an example, how was this particular image created? And people will see this image in your exhibition, right?
Yeah. This was on a trail ride in Texas, and they were riding to the Fort San Antonio livestock show. And so I'd been on the trail with them for a few days, and I just really fell in love with this young man's, with just his face. He just had the softest expression. And I mean, this is just one picture out of many that I photographed of him. And but this was just one of those images that just I photographed it. This was when I was shooting for Geographic, and the way it worked for them is I would make I'd make a bunch of photos, and then I would just ship them off, and they would back to DC, and they would process everything. And then about every 2 weeks, I would fly into DC, and we would sit down and we'd edit the photos. And I remember when this photo came up in the editing room, I didn't even remember shooting it. It was like, did I shoot? It's like, did I shoot that? I don't even remember that. I remember the kid, but I don't remember making that image. And so that's how that picture came to be. And I, along the years, if I could make a note to self, I would say take better notes and put them someplace where you can find them. I don't know his name, and I'm hoping that somebody will know who he is and get in touch with me. So
here's another photograph. This is what I like about this photograph. It's when you think of cowboy, you don't think of a cowboy on a horse in the middle of an urban area.
Exactly, especially in Harlem.
Yeah, right, exactly. You got Mama's Fried Chicken back in the background.
Yeah.
I'm sure these people driving around and wondering what the heck is going on here.
Right.
How did this picture come to be?
Well, I had gone. This is the man on the horse is Bumpy Bullock. He owned the White House stables in Philadelphia, and so that's how I got connected with all these guys. And I went to a parade in Harlem. The Black Cowboys in Harlem. They got together and had a little parade. And Bumpsy was just he was the first of all, he looked like a cowboy. I mean, he had the bushy mustache, the chiseled features, very lean, but he looked like a cowboy to begin with. But he was such a proud man. He unfortunately passed away during COVID. And his son is still working in the horse business. But we're in Harlem, and he was trotting his horse down, and it was just one of those things that just happened. Everything came together. The light, I got down low. I wanted to show him more as a monument. I mean, he could be a statue in this intersection, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But just the juxtaposition of everything with the police car and the Mama's Fried Chicken and all the buildings, it was just, I don't know. And this is one of those negatives too, or one of these transparencies that I didn't even remember. We were editing through this, and I remember Elizabeth said, "Whoa, look at that!" And I'm like, I didn't even remember it. But it just popped out of it was the cream that just sort of rose to the top.
Yeah. Here's another. This is a really interesting photograph. Basketball court and a
Yeah,
horse. A couple
yeah,
of guys
yeah,
playing, and it's like they've ridden to this spot. And I can just imagine these fellas riding a horse or taking the horse, and they got a basketball in one hand and the reins in
yeah.
the other. I mean, it's just, how did this come to be?
Yeah, so it's funny because this can be interpreted in so many ways. But what actually was happening here? So this was in Philadelphia at the White House stables, and basically the White House stables was a sort of an abandoned warehouse, more or less, that they had turned into stables. And so, kids after school, kids would come up and they would want to make a little extra money, and they would muck the stables and wash the horses and things like that. So these boys had just washed this horse, and they had it out in the sun, waiting, letting it dry out in the sun, and then they stroke up this little basketball game, you
Wow.
know. So it
Uh,
was, yeah, it was again just one of those things where everything just sort of came together.
that's really cool. And this one, I love this photograph here. It's a beautiful picture. This is an Oklahoma photograph.
This is an Oklahoma.
And,
It's a,
we are familiar, obviously, with rodeos around Oklahoma. And some of us have been to what have been tagged as black rodeos in
mhm,
Foley
mhm,
and used to have one in Slick
mhm.
and in Okmulgee. But this is just a beautiful photograph.
Yeah.
Uh, how did this come to be?
Again, it's just one of those things where everything. Just sort of happened. This was during the grand entry at Okmulgee, and the sunlight was right. This is shot on Kodachrome 200 film, which is some of the most beautiful film ever invented. The sunlight was just right. There's another shot of this where there's a woman waving, and her hand kind of shoots in from the left side, and then there's this frame. So I just got lucky that this woman moved her hand, and but the expression on the woman in the front didn't change. So yeah, it was just one of those things that just being in the right spot at the right time with the right light.
Now, you have also published a book. It is actually out now and available for everybody to purchase from Amazon.
Hmm.
And I believe we'll have some of those books at the Depot Gallery. If people want to purchase them there and take a look at them there. What the book idea, I guess for a lot of photographers, that is sort of the goal sometimes, to have a
Oh yeah.
book, have
Well,
a
yeah.
coffee table book and all. But you've been co-author of another book before this one. This is not
Hmm.
something all that new to you,
Hmm.
but are there challenges in getting books published these
Oh,
days?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not an easy task. I think maybe offending somebody, but for a man, it's the equivalent of giving birth. It's really, it's not easy. And it's a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of, you know, um, even if you're working with people that you really trust and you believe in, everybody has differences. And, so yeah, it's not an easy thing. And especially this book, since it's more or less self-published in a way, because the first book was by a big commercial press. It was HarperCollins in New York. And when you have a big commercial press like that, they do everything. You don't really have a say in much. In fact, the book that my co-author and I pitched was not the book that we wound up with, but it sold, but it was a different format and everything else. But this was the book that I wanted. So to do that and then to have everybody on board with what you want, you really have to be, I think, determined to have that happen. Luckily, I was working the book designer that I was working with was so David Skulkin. He's out in Santa Fe. Was just amazing. He was amazing to work with. So and I'd work with him in a second again. But it's just you're just learning on the fly. Things happen. They're throwing words at you that I had never heard of, and I have to make that decision right then if they're on press, and you know, it's a big learning curve. Big learning curve.
Well, you've gone from being that fly on the wall as a photographer there to document events and people and stories, and now you're in the role of a teacher
Mhm.
there in Philadelphia. How's that different for you? And what's your goal as a teacher?
It's funny. I just got out of class a couple hours ago, so my head's still, and I still have to do some work after we get off. But I love it. I mean, I really, really love the class. The class I'm teaching now it's the first year class. So I teach. They all start off the 4x5, four big 4-inch medium format, large format camera, and it's dumb as a rock. I tell them it's as dumb as a hammer. You can take a hammer, you can make a beautiful work of art with it, or you can punch a hole in the wall. So, and you can do that same thing with that camera. It doesn't do anything for you. But I don't know. The students I have at Swarthmore for one thing is it's a very selective school. So we get some of the top students in the country. I mean, they could go to any Ivy school, any Ivy college or university that they wanted to, but they chose a small liberal arts school like Swarthmore. So I do have sort of the cream of the crop when it comes to students. And my class is hard to get into. I only accept 8. Although I accepted 11 this time because I'm just a big softball, and I think they realized that, and 3 of them talked their way into the class. But yeah, but I love that those light bulb moments when students get I first of all, when they get past the technical stuff and they start really making images, that's what I really love, to see them really engaged in creating a conversation with the medium and with their audience. I really love that part of it. So,
Is there a big difference between photography in news reporting, telling those stories, and photography in the art world, in the fine art world? I see there's an overlap there in some ways, but there might be some differences as well. Am I?
oh yeah, I think there's probably more differences than than there are, sameness. Um, so when I started, actually, going back a little bit about how I got hired at Swarthmore. So I was adjuncting there as I was working for the Inquirer because a friend of mine taught in the art department, and there was a photographer there that started building her family, and she eventually left, and so I sort of became the fill-in adjunct photographer for the art department, and I would just go in and just teach the class, and I just loved hanging out with the kids, but I'd still have to go back and and do my work for the paper. But then they decided to make the photo department expand the photo department, and so they asked me if I'd be interested in doing that. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. But I had to get an MFA, and so here I am, like 50 something years old, going back to school, getting an MFA, and really learning what art is. And I didn't know what art was. It's a whole different thing. So I had to like think about, how do I make pictures that are more conceptual? And so that's some of what's hanging up back here now. So I took some of my dad's work, and I've been doing things with his work and making more conceptual work about the time that he photographed in the 40s and 50s, and then creating images that speak to our time now using his images, and building a portfolio around that. So I think it's a different thing when you're a photojournalist and you go out and you point your camera at a thing and you make a picture of that thing, as opposed to, in my case, the art that I'm doing now, actually building things or using images in more of a conceptual way, and that evoke something rather than represent something.
Yeah. For those people who come to see your work at the depot, what would you hope they would take from their experience seeing your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this particular work that from the book, I want this work just to be a love letter to the experience of African American African American heritage, of Western heritage. That's what I want this to be. And it's not, the book isn't trying to be preachy. It's not trying to be necessarily be historical, although we do have a section in there by Art Burton, who's a really amazing historian. But I just want the book I want people to just look at the images and just love them for what they are, and not read anything into it, in terms of politics or anything else. It's just a book that celebrates this Western heritage.
Ron, thanks for visiting with me.
Oh, thank you.
This has been awesome, and
Yeah.
we're pretty excited, obviously, about having your work on the walls at the depot. I think we have over 30 images that are going to be on the walls. Your book has over 100 pictures from this in it, and we are just very thankful to have you in Norman. Thank you so much.
Can't wait to see you Thursday.
Yeah, we'll be there, and I just want to let everybody know this is an exhibition that's made possible by some supporters of the depot, including White and Weddle and a law firm in Oklahoma City, and many other supporters of the depot who help us promote art of Oklahomans. And we have one of the best artists from Oklahoma here with us today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron.
All right, thank you.
I will see you soon.
Yeah, okay.